Welcome to the IRB presentation on budgeting for single IRB review fees. I'm Ann Johnson from the IRB and hope to guide you through some of the nuances of single IRB review fees and when you may need to think about these prior to initiating a grant or review with the IRB. So today we're going to talk about two main concepts and then we'll go into some details within each of these areas. The first is the foundation for single IRB costs and where the single IRB movement has come from and why we now have costs associated with single IRB review. And then additionally, to follow up, we will be talking about the University of Utah's specific single IRB fees, what that fee structure looks like, and how you can budget for upfront single IRB fees as part of your grant process. The foundation for single IRB costs comes from the new regulatory requirements that have been released both by the NIH as well as the Department for Health and Human Services. The NIH released a policy that requires all multi-site domestic, non-exempt NIH research with grant application receipt after September 25th, 2017 to use a single IRB. This does not apply to career development grants, research training grants, or fellowship awards. This policy was effective as of January in 2018. So we have been seeing single IRB review requirements coming across in NIH-funded studies since that point in time. Additionally, the Department of Health and Human Services has issued regulatory updates to the Common Rule, which require all domestic cooperative research that's ready for IRB submission on or after January 20th, 2020 to receive IRB review with a single IRB. I want you to note here the number of agencies that are currently subscribed to the Common Rule. There's quite a list of them. One thing to point out, however, is that the Food and Drug Administration is not currently one of the agencies that is requiring single IRB review. Now, there is expectation that the FDA will become harmonized with this requirement in the next few years, but that has yet to be seen. We'll keep you updated. The NIH policy for single IRB review now requires all grant applications and contract proposals to include a plan for single IRB implementation. This includes identifying a single IRB of record if possible, and confirming that you will adhere to the policy by obtaining single IRB review once the award is issued. This plan should also include a description of how the investigators will interact with the single IRB. This is why it's helpful to know which single IRB you are using prior to your grant award. However, it's not necessarily required. There are grants that have been accepted and approved knowing that a single IRB will be identified after the award is issued. So be prepared for that as you are incorporating this information into your grant application. At this point in time, the plan is a requirement and a condition of the award. So you need to make sure to identify this information early on in your grant process so that you can get it incorporated with your submission. In addition to the single IRB policy update with the NIH, guidance was released on the use of direct and indirect costs for single IRB review under the NIH policy. The NIH recognized that any IRB that is considered to take on the single IRB activities will likely be taking on extra responsibilities for review for each of the sites they would not normally have reviewed, and this does incur additional costs. The NIH breaks this down into two types of activities, primary activities and secondary activities. The primary activities are the ones that you're used to your local IRB performing for you every day. This is the ethical review of your protocol as well as the informed consent document that you're going to be using for the study. Secondary activities, though, include the review of site-specific considerations and that ongoing oversight of each participating site, which is something that local IRBs were not taking on before. And this is what is incurring that additional cost. The NIH acknowledges in their guidance that in general, primary activities should be charged as indirect costs if those activities are included in an organization's federally approved indirect cost rate agreement. Secondary activities may be charged as direct cost with appropriate budget justification. As part of this guidance, the NIH has given some scenarios or examples to illustrate what they mean. I'm going to highlight a few key examples that are very relevant to how the University of Utah is implementing this policy. The first scenario here, which is scenario 1 in the document from the NIH, shows that the awardee is institution A. They are the prime award. They're conducting the study at their site. They have selected the IRB at their institution as the single IRB. In addition to institution A, there are 14 sub-awardees. So in breaking down the primary activities and the secondary activities, institution A's IRB would have been conducting the review for institution A anyway. Thus, their indirect costs are already covered through the F&A rate that was been negotiated for that site. The secondary activities, however, for the additional 14 sub-awardees would not have been covered in the institution's F&A rate, and thus the institution IRB can charge those additional direct cost rates for those participating sites. In this additional scenario, the NIH policy illustrates that institution A, while still the prime awardee in conducting the study, we see that an IRB at another institution has been chosen as the IRB of record for this study. Institution C, where the IRB is from, is not a sub-awardee. Thus, where we have a study with institution A and 14 sub-awardees, we have a situation with institution C where they're not collecting any indirect cost rate off of that grant because they're not a sub-awardee or a prime awardee. Thus, all of the primary and secondary activities performed by the IRB at institution C are allowed to be charged as a direct cost because institution C is not a sub-awardee. Both of these situations may be relevant to research that's going on at the University of Utah, where you may be using the University of Utah's IRB as your IRB of record for your multi-site research, or where you may be using an IRB at another institution in order to cover those activities. Fees need to be incorporated into your grant application and budgeted for as appropriate, depending on these two scenarios. It is also important to note the difference in costs between the single IRB review and the single IRB coordination. Single IRB review costs generally cover the costs that it takes for an IRB office to do the review. It covers the effort that's made by the IRB staff and its members. Single IRB coordination costs, however, include the costs that it takes for the study team or a coordinating center to actually compile the single IRB documentation and submit it to an IRB. Generally, this has been performed by coordinating centers and study personnel and remains a responsibility of that team. You should be preparing your grant applications to cover those costs as appropriate, depending on your study. We will now move into the University of Utah's single IRB fee structure and process, noting the specifics of how the University of Utah will charge these fees. Our approach to single IRB fees is to use an upfront fee model based on relevant factors that are known at the beginning of the study. We recognized that with grant budgeting, you need to be able to budget upfront for the costs that you are going to incur later on when the study is actually being conducted, and that there's not a lot of discretionary fund available if things change throughout the study. Some IRBs use an itemized fee model where you pay for every single submission over the lifetime of the study. But because it can be hard to predict how many submissions you'll have over the course of the study, it's not ideal for upfront budgeting and can be difficult to incorporate into your grant application. The IRB at the University of Utah has identified the following 4 factors that generally are known at the time that you're preparing your grant or designing your study, and we can incorporate these factors when calculating the cost of single IRB review. The first thing that we consider is the number of years the study will be open. Obviously, the longer the study is open, the more single IRB review effort will be needed over the course of that study, and thus a higher cost will be incurred. The second thing that we think about is the number of participating research sites that will need single IRB review. And in concert with the number of years it will be open, the more sites you have, the more cost because of the effort that is needed in order to conduct that review. 2 other things that we think about is whether or not the University of Utah or one of its academic affiliates is a participating site. If the University of Utah is a participating site in the multi-center study, the institution is collecting your single IRB review fee via indirect costs instead of direct costs. Thus, part of the fee that we propose to you needs to be waived so that we aren't double dipping by charging indirect and direct costs. I think it's important to note that the University of Utah has decided to use an indirect plus direct cost model. So when you're referencing the NIH's guidance on costs, you will understand where the IRB falls. The last thing that we consider is the number of ongoing submissions per year after initial single IRB review. This is obviously something that we have to estimate and not have exact numbers on necessarily. But based on queries of the University of Utah's prospective clinical research studies, the median number of IRB submissions per year after initial review lies between 3 and 4. And generally, if the study is non-interventional, there's about 3 submissions per year. And if it's interventional, there are about 4. So we are able to estimate pretty accurately at the beginning of a study or at a grant submission time approximately how many submissions during the course of the year will occur. When it comes to charging for the single IRB fees, they're broken down into what happens during initial review as well as annual review for the single IRB. On the left side of your screen, you're going to see the single site study fees that we have for industry-sponsored studies, and this is the list of itemized fees that we are charging. We then take these fees and apply them to our multi-site fee model where we can calculate approximately how much it's going to cost us over time to do the review for you. As a reminder, with this asterisk, if the University of Utah or one of its affiliated sites is a participating site in a federally funded study, we will waive this protocol review fee as well as one of the site fees because we're collecting that as part of our indirect cost rate. Important to note, as part of the initial review and annual review, what the IRB is actually providing for you when we act as the single IRB. During initial review, we're providing you with Reliance consultation services. This includes Reliance agreement negotiation, Reliance documentation procurement, and Reliance communication between our single IRB and the relying sites. Additionally, as part of that initial review, we review your new study application, which includes the standard protocol review, risk-benefit assessment, and informed consent form review that we would do normally. But in addition to this, each relying site is going to have site-specific informed consent documents, recruitment materials, and perhaps site-specific changes in how they're going to perform the protocol. These things the IRB would also review as part of the single IRB review. Later, we will then have ongoing submissions as part of the annual review, and these you will recognize as things like amendments, continuing reviews, and report forms. These would be conducted anyway as part of your protocol review at the University of Utah, but we need to incorporate the site-specific changes, updated consent documents, and problems and events that may occur on a relying site basis. Prior to giving you some examples of how the IRB calculates our single IRB fees, I want to put the following disclaimer in front of you. The University of Utah IRB purposefully does not post the single IRB fee schedule on the IRB website, and there are 2 main reasons for this. The first is that the University of Utah IRB must proactively agree to serve as your single IRB. We get a choice, and you get a choice in doing this work. So please don't add us to your grants without our permission and without consulting with us first. The second reason is we want to help you to prevent fee calculation errors. We want to ensure that the nuances of our calculations are reflected in your budget so that you're not over budgeting or under budgeting for the review that we're going to perform. So the fee amounts presented in the following slides are for example only, but will help to illustrate exactly how the IRB is applying fees and costs to the models that we've talked about. Here is one example estimate. On the left, you'll see the conditions that we've applied to this study. This is a non-interventional study with 10 sites, and it's a 4-year award. If we assume that the initial review fees for the protocol are $2,500 and the per site fees are $1,400 at initial review, and the per year fees are $3,000 as well as $1,500 per site, you can see the different calculations that we have here. Both if the University of Utah is one of the affiliate sites that are participating in the study, which is the table on the bottom left. The table on the bottom right is if the University of Utah were not a participating site and the University of Utah IRB were performing single IRB review as an independent institution. You can see on the left that we are waiving the protocol review fees because the University of Utah is a participating site. And we are also only calculating for 9 participating sites because the University of Utah would not be included in that calculation. On the right then, you now see that the initial review fee for protocol review and annual review has not been waived, and it is extrapolated out by year. Additionally, all 10 sites are covered because we are not removing the University of Utah as a site. You'll also notice with the timeline that's in the center of your screen that the initial payment will be due at the beginning of the study as we initiate our review, and that at the end of each year, a payment will be expected, and at the end of the study, end of year 4 in this case, there would also be a payment expected to cover the expenses of the previous year. So if you would like a fee quote, we have a mechanism for requesting one on the IRB website. You will see this button to request a fee quote, which also submits a consultation request for the quote itself. The University of Utah IRB staff are committed to responding within 2 business days or less to get a meeting or time set up with you to discuss your study and to provide you with that fee quote. We recognize that sometimes grants are submitted on an urgent schedule, and we will do our best to provide you with these quotes in a timely manner to meet your submission deadlines. The Reliance consultation itself includes requests for single IRB quotes, but also requests for just-in-time letters, as well as requests for grant language to describe the University of Utah as your single IRB. We have language that's available that you can include in your grant that describes the work that we do and the experience that we have in conducting single IRB reviews. On the other side of this, e-proposal through the Office of Sponsored Projects has been updated to include a question about the use of single IRB for your project and the need for budgeting single IRB as a consideration. This e-proposal language will then direct you back to the Reliance consultation form on the IRB's website. So these two are working in tandem to hopefully help you prepare as best you can for these new requirements in grant proposals. Here we present an example fee quote that will allow you to see the project details at the top, showing the number of sites that we are projecting, the number of years that the project will be open, the study design, as well as whether or not the University of Utah or one of our affiliates will be a site. This helps us to base our calculations, which you'll see in the quote details down below. You'll see the initial protocol review and site review breakdown by sites and years, as well as the annual protocol review and site review breakdown, again by sites and years. You'll then have a total fee cost at the bottom of the quote that you can incorporate into your budget. If you are budgeting annually and showing these in terms of annual costs, you'll be able to break these down by year as well. You have the choice and the option of whether or not to add the single IRB fees as a direct cost to the prime award or to splitting the fees up between the prime award and the subawards themselves. There are pros and cons to each approach, and there's currently no guidance from the NIH on which one is more beneficial. So the pros for including everything on the prime award include being able to account for all of your costs out of one source account, which can prevent delays because of payment coordination. Additionally, if the University of Utah is the prime awardee, the fees are very easily paid electronically through the UShop application. Some benefits for splitting these costs between the prime and subaward include being able to distribute the costs across sites so that there's not one bulk cost on the prime award. Additionally, there may be the philosophical aspect of allowing sites to feel responsible for their own IRB review destiny, and that if they want their study reviewed or their site reviewed faster, they need to pay their fees. This is up to you. You get to decide, and we can certainly advise on this as part of your Reliance consultation and can be made on an award-by-award basis. The process for paying the single IRB fees to the University of IRB is as follows. First, you'll get an invoice sent from the ERICA system once you submit the application in ERICA. This notice will be sent to the responsible investigator and contacts, which is generally the lead investigator. Individual invoices are not sent to each site investigator, regardless of whether or not you have all of the fees on the prime award or have them split with each subaward. The responsible investigator is the one who needs to coordinate the payment of the fees and disseminate the costs out to the sites if that's how it's being handled. As a site becomes ready for initial IRB review, the IRB can send invoice for the cost of that site. So we may choose to bundle sites on a single invoice instead of splitting them out site by site. You'll see here we have an example invoice and what the itemization looks like. You'll notice that we'll have the initial protocol review as a line item, and we can enter as many participating sites in underneath that as we would like. Now, if you amend later to add a new site, we would send an invoice with just the costs for that participating site listed on it. You may not have a site approved by the IRB before your first annual review. You will only be charged the annual review fee for sites that have IRB approval at the time of annual review. So your invoice will list the sites that are covered. One of the things to note is the fine print with these invoices. As with all IRB fees, the new study IRB review process will not begin until the initial fee is received. Additionally, the site review process will not begin until the site's fee is received as well. Annual reviews, on the other hand, will proceed even if we have not received the fee. However, we will not process the approval until the annual fee is received. Payments, whether within the University of Utah or outside, can be made via UShop or a check. Some post-award considerations also need to be made when thinking about fees. Some common questions that get asked are what we will go over now. First, will fee adjustments be made if the award is reduced? The answer to this is no. The only time we will reduce the fee of single IRB review is if you also reduce the number of years or number of sites for the study. Will fee adjustments be made based on actual work? Yes, this is a possibility, and this will happen at the end of the study at the time of final payment. We will not charge you for a full year if you close before the full year ends. The cost then will be prorated. But we will not charge you more than we quoted for unless your study is extended or you add sites. So if you end up doing more amendments or report forms than we had originally estimated for you, we will be providing those reviews free of charge, and no more cost will be incurred by you. Are reliance agreements negotiated with contracts? The answer is no. The Office of Sponsored Projects negotiates all financial contracts, but the IRB negotiates reliance agreements. In order to ensure that consistency is maintained, we would ask you to avoid including reliance language in financial contracts. We have seen this occur before and have had to do revisions in order to avoid contradicting terms. When will the IRB begin reliance negotiations? In order for us to negotiate reliance with any of the participating sites, you must be in a place where you can meet two conditions. Number one, you must have your notice of award. Number two, you must have a finalized protocol. Lacking these things actually causes a lot of confusion as we begin to interact with the participating sites, especially when we're interacting with those sites' human research protection programs. This has been shown to cause extra work during reliance negotiation. So we encourage you to meet these two conditions before approaching us to have this conversation with participating sites. We want to thank you for joining this presentation today. If you have questions further about single IRB review fees, you can visit our website, which is presented on the screen, or you can call us directly and ask questions. Additionally, as part of the Reliance consultation process, you'll be able to ask all of the questions that you'd like and get an experienced IRB manager to answer them for you. Again, thank you for joining us.